Hello, everybody. Welcome into The Cycle. I am Ryan Wormeli, joined as always by Mike Maher, who wanted me very explicitly to tell everybody that he is editor-in-chief here at FantasyPros. It was really important to him that I use his title. But not as always. We have a guest today. We had a few guests last season. We haven't really done it a lot this year, Maher, but I was talking to George, and I was like, you know what? We want to get some guests on. He's great. We talked to him during the Fantasy Fest back in March, so let's bring him on again. George Bissell from RotoWorld, editor, writer, a whole bunch of stuff over there. No known official title. George, thanks for coming on with us.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I'm honored to be one of the very few guests to come on this show, and you got me at a perfect time. We're sort of in that little transitional state before we hit the trade deadline next week. We just had the MLB draft, so we had a bunch of new names to talk about for Dynasty purposes, and we're going to have a lot of prospects moved at the trade deadline as well. So really fun time in the baseball calendar and a lot to get to.
It's always an interesting couple weeks because you have that reset at the All-Star break. It's kind of the unofficial start of the second half, even though technically that started a few weeks earlier. But it does feel like you're almost in a holding pattern, right, ahead of the trade deadline, just to kind of see how things shake out before you really get into the stretch run. So it's an interesting time of year, and yeah, we're definitely happy to have you on. We're going to run through some news and notes, just general stuff going on in baseball. Then we want to talk about your mega update to your Fantasy Baseball Dynasty rankings on RotoWorld, your top 500 players in Dynasty, so we'll talk about that. And then we're going to kind of do a second half, stretch run, playoff run, kind of strategy guide from George, how we're approaching the final couple months of the season, because it's hard to believe. It feels like just yesterday we were on the Fest talking bold predictions that we were just mentioning before the show were largely very incorrect. And here we are here, just a couple weeks away from the playoffs and head-to-head leagues and just a few months left in the season. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Maher, do you want to run us through some of these news and notes? I did write down the first one, which I was like, not at all fantasy actionable, but Shohei Ohtani has 5 straight games with a homer. Just worth mentioning. It's awesome. He's really good. Not really much you could talk about fantasy. What else do we have here in the news and notes?
Yeah, I mean, Ohtani 5 straight games. It almost feels like any other batter we would be like, whoa, this is incredible. But Ohtani, it's like, wow, like he's still really good. It's like not even news. We rarely even talk about it. If I didn't see it yesterday in our Discord with someone talking about it, I might not have even realized it happened. A couple of names, George mentioned the trade deadline is coming up. We might see some big pitcher names traded. Some are pitching better than others. The biggest name is probably Joe Ryan, just because he's one of the best pitchers out there in baseball right now. He's pitching really well. I said the biggest name, but he also kind of feels underappreciated, it seems like most years, because he's really, really good. The Twins still have a couple years of control on him, and so they're listening for offers, but it kind of sounds like the situation where they might need to be blown away. Dylan Cease not having as good of a year, but he could also be traded, so we could see a bunch of big names like that, like Dylan Cease, Joe Ryan. Sandy Alcantara is an interesting case, and maybe even Edward Cabrera on the Marlins. Nick Lodolo just threw a complete game shutout. He's, we can talk about him a little bit if you want. He's kind of having a really, really good breakout year for him, but don't know if I buy all of the things happening, behind, all of the underlying data is not necessarily painting the prettiest picture for Lodolo, but still having a really good year. Taj Bradley, very famous on this show, was demoted the other day. Shane Baz, still in the rotation. George, we'll fill you in on that joke.
Yeah, Maher has repeatedly mixed up Taj Bradley.
One time, not repeatedly. One time.
I know, I'm just giving you a hard time. It was one time, but the commenters were very merciless about it, misspeaking between the two. So that's what he's referencing there. But yes, it was not Shane Baz getting demoted. It was Taj Bradley.
Yeah, very easy to mix those two up. And also, by the way, I corrected myself immediately. I made the mistake, and I think I forgot. I can't even remember which one I actually wanted to talk about. But Worm was at that pitcher's last start, and he's like, "Are you sure? He just had a dud of a start." And I was like, "Am I thinking of Shane Baz? I'm thinking of Shane Baz." And YouTube commenters still rip me apart for it. So
as they are wont to do.
Not bitter. I definitely don't think about it every day. And then this one I thought was interesting because Max Fried is struggling a little bit lately, and he's also been dealing with a blister, and now it also seems like he has another cut on his hand, so his hand is just kind of falling apart on him right now, which is really important for you when you're a starting pitcher in the big leagues. And I know we talked whether it was last week or the week before with Fried and the blisters. Those are the kind of things for pitchers that don't really seem like a big deal, but they can derail a season if they just linger like that. And then the other thing I was potentially wanting to talk about was Jeff Passan's MLB trade deadline preview and some of the moves he predicted that might happen.
I want to kind of loop together the trade deadline stuff with Passan's preview and then also some of these pitchers we mentioned like Joe Ryan and Dylan Cease. George, when you look at some of these, like Dylan Cease, I think in particular is a really interesting case because a lot of the underlying metrics are kind of continue to say like there's room for bounce back here. A lot of his expected numbers are stronger than what his ERA actually looks like. Obviously, you're getting strikeouts to Cease. But this is like kind of 2 of the last 3 years with an ERA sitting in the mid 4s and, hasn't looked anything like he did, a few years ago when he was like a true fantasy ace. And the Padres are a good team that are going to win games. So if he gets traded, do you think it's likely to hurt or help his fantasy value? And he's somebody that you would be interested in trading for in a fantasy league.
So this stuff's always pretty context dependent. Based on the landing spot, obviously they're not going to trade him to somewhere like the Dodgers where he'd have a lot more potential to win games. It feels like the rest of the NL West has fallen out of contention there. So, yeah, I think I always take a wait and see approach with these types of moves because it's going to depend where he lands. And oftentimes when you have guys changing leagues, there's a little bit of an adjustment period. They're facing a bunch of guys they've never faced before. You don't have the book on certain hitters. So there's usually a little bit of an adjustment period as they acclimate to a new setting, a new league. So those are the types of things I'd consider. I think like Edward Cabrera to me is the really interesting name because of the progress he's made this season. I think he's a guy where I think could take a leap if he gets into a better situation. Cease is kind of just one of those guys. I think he is what he is at this point. And like you said, a lot of the underlying metrics from like a FIP standpoint suggest he's been a little bit unlucky this year. The strikeouts have still been there. So yeah, interesting to see where he lands. And I try not to change my opinion too much on guys who are pretty established veteran guys with a couple years of track record.
For Dylan Cease, Maher, is that somebody for you in fantasy that you're considering, or is there how are you approaching this potential trade deadline with a guy like Cease in mind, who I think you can make the case for as an interesting trade target, even aside from this trade chatter, but then also has this other factor going on?
Well, I unfortunately was very high on Dylan Cease coming into the season, so I already have a bunch of Dylan Cease, and it hasn't been going great in some of my leagues. So maybe for me, if he gets traded to the right spot, it could be a great sell high opportunity for me heading into our fantasy deadline. I was just trying to think while George was talking about the context and like where I would be like most interested in him, and where he landed that I would be the most interested in him. And I was thinking maybe the Houston Astros, like maybe one of these organizations that is known for kind of getting the most out of pitchers. I don't know that he's like the perfect fit there, but just kind of, one of those organizations that we've seen like can make small tweaks to pitchers and just like unlock a new level. Not that he's like a young pitcher, but he does kind of like, he has great stuff. He's all over the place.
The Mets are another one where I'd be fascinated to see what they could do if they put him in the lab there with Jeremy Hefner, their pitching coach. St. Louis is interesting because it feels like a lot of guys go into that environment and have success. So I know they need starting pitching. They just designated Eric Fedde for assignment. So they have a big hole there in the rotation. I know Michael McGreevy, they're going to give him a shot, but they could always upgrade there. So like St. Louis would be fascinating to me. The Mets, teams like that would be the ones I'd be interested in. The Yankees, it's tough with the ballpark context. Like that's a tough spot to go into. And the entire AL East too. It's just tough.
Yeah. Maher, are there any other names in the? I didn't actually read through because you sent the article kind of last second, but not to throw you under the bus. But any other names in the article from Jeff Passan that stand out that you had wanted to hit on specifically? I was reading through quickly. I was looking at the Orioles just for my own interest, and it was he was mentioning that their best asset is Felix Bautista, and I was like, well, maybe not anymore with him going on the IL this morning. So that's a bummer. But did anybody stand out for you, Maher, that you had wanted to hit on?
Not necessarily that I wanted to hit on. Some of the bigger names, though, Jarren Duran was in there. Your boy Cedric Mullins was in there. Obviously, Cease. I was trying to think of some of the landing spots. Eugenio Suarez is an interesting one because it seems like he's a perfect fit for someone like like a team like the Yankees. He's kind of like in that Cease mold though. Like he is what he is. He's not going to change a whole lot. Mackenzie Gore to the Cubs was an interesting one. I don't know if I see that happening, but the idea of him going to the Cubs could be interesting as long as the wind is blowing in when he's pitching and not blowing out. And then Mitch Keller, some of these, there are like, it seems like the controllable pitching, like Joe Ryan is going to be really expensive, but maybe someone like, like a Mitch Keller and like a Seth Lugo, those could be really interesting pitchers for fantasy if they go to better teams. Passan has Keller going to the Blue Jays, which I thought was interesting.
I'll give you one. Can
I
I
was
give
gonna
you
ask
one?
just quickly, are the Nats gonna trade Gore? I didn't.
I don't think so.
I was
But
gonna
he's
say
in
why.
this article.
That's an interesting one. I was like, I wouldn't have thought that. Where were you gonna go with it, George?
I think Merrill Kelly's interesting because I don't think it's going to take a lot to pry him out of Arizona. They just got swept by the Astros. They're kind of out of it. They're looking to pivot. He'll be a free agent at the end of the year. Like if he could go somewhere like Boston or New York, like I think that'd be interesting because he's just a solid. He's kind of underrated for fantasy. I think he can go in and get a bunch of wins over the final 2 months and be one of those guys that's not going to be a flashy acquisition, but I think would make a difference on a contender. And I don't think he's going to cost anything remotely close to what you'd get for like a Joe Ryan. So like he's a guy I'm watching to see where he ends up because I think he could be interesting.
Do you have like one team player fit, George, that you would most want to see if you could just like pick and choose?
Probably Edward Cabrera to the Dodgers. I think that would be fascinating because they would try to get the most they could out of him. And they've been like floating this weird Dustin May rumor like he's available. And they just do you trust like Tyler Glasnow and Blake Snell to be ready to go in a playoff series? Is Ohtani really going to pitch 5 innings in a playoff game? Like I just don't know. I think they could use another starter. And if you're going to go big, they have a bunch of outfield prospects they could move. Guys who I've been ranking at RotoWorld for the last few months and last few years. I think that's a interesting fit for me just because of the talent. And I think they could maximize what they get out of him there.
By the way, just with the trade deadline, next week, I just want to let everybody know that Maher and I, our show might get released a little bit later next week because we are going to tape a day later to kind of account for seeing all these moves. We'd rather react to them than, be kind of seeing what happens on the day of and everything like that. So you might see the show a little bit later next week. Just a heads up for everybody. We will still be doing a show just a day late. I want to let everybody know that we're giving away a Juan Gonzalez signed Rangers jersey, courtesy of our friends at pristineauction.com. All you have to do to enter is to subscribe to the FantasyPros MLB YouTube channel right now. Drop a comment below on any video, and that is it. We will be announcing one lucky winner right here on the channel, so make sure to turn on those notifications so you can know when new videos are up and to claim your prize. All right, George, let's get into this Dynasty midseason update. I was actually messaging you just for my own trade. I was like getting your opinion on something, and it's actually a trade that I had talked about on the show last week with Maher as well, and you agreed with Maher, and I did end up making the trade. So for everybody who was wondering from last week when we talked about it, I did acquire a $75 Ronald Acuna in a win now move here. So we'll see how it pans out. We had some other very interesting trades going on in that league.
I was going to say, we have to talk about that other trade.
So there was this league has been going on. I think this is year 6, I want to say, maybe year 7. It's been around for over half a decade. And we have always had, George, Maher is new to the league. I've been in the league from the beginning, but we have always had there's no vetoes. Any trade's fine. You're all adults. You can make the moves you want. And we had a few days ago the best team in the league, whose team is like completely loaded. They have like a very cheap Pete Crow Armstrong, a cheap Corbin Carroll, an affordable Aaron Judge. They have like Mookie and Freddie Free. They have like a $1 Skubal, a $2 Hunter Brown. Like their team is loaded. They've done a great job of building the team. They traded with the last place team, who has one good player and is absolutely terrible and doesn't respond to anybody else's trade offers or anything. Traded Luis Hill, who obviously has pitched one season in the last 3 years, and Steven Kwan, who's like $11 or something, for a $26 Fernando Tatis Jr. And the league got pretty up in arms about it, and there was a lot of like, listen, I know we don't veto, but are we really letting this stand? Can the guy who traded away Tatis explain his position? And like I don't know what he could say that would make us be okay with it, but can he at least explain it? And it caused a very, very huge fight. I'll spare some of the details, but it was the most messages that have been ever sent in our league's chat function, and it did end up getting reversed. It's the only time we've ever done that in that league. And the idea that Maher and I were talking about kind of on the side is like, this isn't just like, oh, he didn't spend enough to get a rental. This is like going to impact the league for years to come, just giving away Tatis for essentially nothing. And it's coming from a manager who's probably going to be out of, like, it seems like he's going to quit the league anyway, and it's just like getting rid of him on the way out. So we were all pretty, like I said, up in arms about it. What do you think when you hear that trade? Again, it was Luis Hill and Steven Kwan for a very affordable guy who would go for twice as much if he was available in a salary cap, Fernando Tatis.
So that's the challenge with Dynasty Leagues, right? Is you're dealing with different gaps in information, attentiveness, strategy. I am opposed to vetoing any trade just because I think as long as someone believes that it's in the best interest of their team, I don't think we should be delving into their methodology, whatever. I think they can do whatever they want with their roster as long as there's no evidence of anything from a collusion standpoint, anything of that nature. And it doesn't sound like these two teams are working together. There was anything like that. I think I probably would not have done that trade, but I just think we should let people make their own decisions. And I believe in just an open process of staying out of things. I've become very strong in this belief just because I think it gets tough because where do you draw the line? I think it's a slippery slope for me. I'm not to make this like a political argument or anything, but I view it as like, where do you draw the line between what's an acceptable trade and where I might have an objection based on it's going to hurt my team that you're helping this other team in their contention cycle. So I just think if it's a bad trade and they're going to stay in the league, they will learn from that experience very quickly not to do that in the future.
So one of the things, well, first of all, Maher asked me before the show, he was like, should we ask George about this trade because it was such a big deal? And I was like, I'm afraid he's going to say we shouldn't have vetoed it. And then, of course, that's what you did. Philosophically, I generally agree. Like, I don't think every trade needs to be fair. There was a trade last season that everybody was really mad about that did not get reversed, that I was on the side of, guys, just let this happen. It was like, this was like a year ago. It was Jackson Holiday and Ozzie Albies for like a very expensive Mookie, a very expensive Vlad Guerrero, and a cheap Chris Sale. And everybody was like, hey, you're just giving up a prospect who struggled and a second baseman who's hurt, and you're getting all these guys. But it's like, yeah, they're like, that's your choice, though. Like, these are really expensive guys. If you want to keep them, Sale, you know, who knows if his arm's going to stay on. Like, I didn't agree with the trade, but I was like, it's fine to make that. Teams are allowed to do what they want. This one was like, boy, I find it's really struggle to justify this one. And the guy, he eventually did, like, over 24 hours later, finally, like, come out and say why he'd done the trade. And he was like, well, Tatis was, like, really expensive, so I wasn't going to keep him anyway. And we were like, he would go for almost 60 if you throw him back, and he's $26. What do you mean he's expensive?
So, yes, the logic's not great there. But the other thing I'll say is I don't want to absolve it was a first place contending team going for the championship. I don't want to absolve them completely too, because if you are in the process of potentially making a trade like that and you know how it looks, I might float this out to other people in league, be like, hey, I'm close to finalizing a deal, as Jeff Passan would say. This is going to ruffle some feathers. What do you guys think? I would always be a little bit cognizant of that, because your relationship with your league mates, and this is kind of maybe the overall broader point of this, your relationship with your trading partners, your league mates in a dynasty league is more important than anything else. So you have to understand, if you're going to do this type of move, you're probably burning bridges with everybody else in the league, and that's going to hurt your ability to make moves in the future. So just be cognizant of that when you're on both ends of the spectrum, whether you're trying to compete and pushing the chips to the center of the table, or you're rebuilding, because whatever moves you make, people are going to remember, hey, he did that or she did that 5 years ago, and I am not going to forget about it. So just be mindful of that whenever you're making trades always.
Yeah, this manager did quite the opposite.
I was going to say he could have used that advice. He ended up crashing out in epic fashion and actually left the league after this happened. But he did it in a I'm going to burn bridges on the way out kind of a way. It was like I get his frustration of like, hey, I made this trade, why doesn't it stand? But he was like, he did not take that approach with it, which is his right. I think that's a good piece of advice, though, for anybody in general in trading, is to keep the other managers in mind in that regard. The last thing I'll say about it before we move on to your rankings is I had offered Francisco Lindor for Tatis and not even gotten a response. So it was extra frustrating for me to be like, you didn't give me a response, but now you're accepting Hill and Kwan instead. Like, that was tough for me.
Speaking of George's rankings, as we transition, do you want to? Well, actually, I'll ask you, George. Do you know where, right off the top of your head, where you have Luis Hill ranked in your dynasty rankings?
I want to say it's around 200. Let me pull it up real quick.
Deeper than that.
Is it? Let me see it.
I have it up. You want me to tell you?
Let's see. You can
Scroll. Is this you scrolling?
295.
Yeah,
Wow.
295.
I think he was 150 at the start of the year.
Yeah, 295, and Tatis shockingly is in the top 10. So
part of that's health concerns, though, as we saw play out, where
yeah.
he's missed 5 months at the start of the year,
Yeah.
basically. So
For sure.
pitchers, they're volatile. I don't know.
So let's get into the rankings then from that perspective. When you're doing this, how much are you considering the volatility of pitchers, not just in terms of volatility even when healthy, but specifically when it comes to health? You have Tariq Skubal is obviously third. He's amazing, right? Like everybody would be happy to have him in Dynasty, but he's ahead of hitters like Ellie De La Cruz, Ronald Acuna Jr. has his own injury stuff. Aaron Judge are the three guys right after him in your rankings. Does the fact that Skubal is a pitcher worry you ranking him inside the top 3?
So I resisted pushing Skubal and Skeens into my top 5 range just because of the volatility of pitchers. That's always been a thing. I would always prefer, as a central kind of roster building philosophy, to center my build around hitters under 25. That's kind of what I'm looking at. Obviously, if you're in a startup, you can go first couple rounds, take best player available. There's not a huge gap there unless you're talking about like a Freddie Freeman type in the early stages of a draft. But I want to prioritize getting hitters under 25. That's how I would view things. Just because with pitchers, you never really know what you're going to get. And part of that's because like a Jacob Mizorowski is a great example where he's a guy who was probably a top 50 range Dynasty prospect coming into the year because of the control issues they were committed to developing as a starter. And then the command takes a leap, and all of a sudden he looks like a potential top 15 starting pitcher for fantasy purposes. So that's the type of thing where you can kind of find and identify those guys a little bit later on. Whereas I don't know that you need to be investing early on in those elite upper echelon guys. But I will say for Skubal and Skeens, the reason they're ranked that highly is because the gap between them and the rest of the starting pitching pool is pretty immense at this point, even with those injury concerns baked in. You look at guys who we thought were relatively safe, like Logan Gilbert, people like that, who were Corbin Burns, guys who had been pretty durable. They've missed time this year due to injury. So no one's really safe or reliable. But when you look at those two guys, I think they're pretty much head and shoulders above the rest of the starting pitching crop at this point.
How do you weigh a breakout season when you're looking in Dynasty? Do you try to give credit and say this is an elevation of this player's skill set and game and the production we can expect going forward? I look at a guy like Cal Raleigh, who Maher actually has in that Dynasty league we were just talking about. He's 40th on the list right here. He's been insanely good this season, right? Obviously, he's had power and stuff in the past, but 39 homers already. Won the home run derby. At a position like catcher where you're just not getting that kind of production. So 40 on the one hand might seem kind of low, but on the other hand, he's a catcher, so like that will be a little more wear and tear on the body. It's also kind of a later breakout, at least a breakout to this level. So how do you kind of square those two things when you're ranking a guy like Raleigh?
So when I open my spreadsheet and I sit down and I go, okay, let's start this process, I go in with the premise that I don't know anything. These rankings are a snapshot in time. You're going to be wrong all of the time. So what you're trying to do is balance all of those variables. And catchers are weird, first of all. Like their aging curves are weird. Their development tracks are weird. Like Gary Sanchez had like 10-5 rights on prospect lists forever. Like he was a prospect forever, then finally got here, and he's still around. So catchers, because of all the things they have to manage, like their breakouts are weird. And for Raleigh, I just look at this as like an extension of what a guy we kind of knew was a pretty much borderline elite power hitter for his position. And this feels to me like a career kind of outlier year where I don't want to overreact to the point that I'm pushing him like into the top 10 of these rankings or anything like that. Like he would not be a first round pick if we did Startup Dynasty next spring. But you have to also weigh that the production he's giving you in the present is probably an early round contributor. So that's someone I want to value in that top 40, 50 range. You can't overlook what he's doing. It's undeniable. But I try to view it where a good example of this is like Lawrence Butler, when he's kind of made the leap in the second half of last year. You look at him and say, okay, I think this is a legitimate skills growth. I think what he's doing is real. I'm going to be aggressive in pushing him higher. Whereas someone like a Nolan Jones, it was maybe more context dependent because he was doing this in Coors Field. So I try to balance that a little bit more when I look at the environment and what actually changed with a hitter. Like, did they make adjustments? Were there real improvements? Can I find evidence that what they're doing is real? Those are the things I kind of look for that I'm weighing when I do these lists.
Maher, how do you feel about the fact that your best player is only 40th on his rankings?
Well, it's funny you say that because I was pulling up my Dynasty rankings and I have him even lower. So I feel pretty good if George likes him more than I do. So I might have to bump him up because I have him in the 50s. So if I could piggyback on that, I was going to ask you about a few specific players.
Yep.
So rather than go one by one, I'll just throw a few at you. One of the more interesting ones I noticed was Cam Smith at 68. He's having a really interesting year. Obviously, really young prospect, came up, struggled, but has been quietly very good for a while now. Yordan Alvarez at 20 is also very interesting to me with the age and health concerns there. I looked at my rankings and I don't have a much lower than you, so but it did jump out to me. And then the last one is, why do you hate Roman Anthony at 32?
I don't know that I hate Roman Anthony. I'll start with Cam Smith. First of all, I'm like a sort of Red Sox fan, so I take that personally. I like Roman Anthony a lot. Phenomenal. Cam Smith, I think he's illustrative of the fact that the gap between AAA and the majors is maybe wider than ever. He's one of 5 guys from the 2024 draft class that have reached the majors. Ryan Johnson with the Asterisks is like the 5th guy. But what you're seeing is the timeline between when a guy gets drafted and when they reach the majors, especially for college hitters and college pitchers. It's getting compressed to the point that the development time's not what it probably was a few years ago. So these guys are kind of learning on the fly, so to speak, at the big league level. Like, they're facing that caliber of pitching for really the first time. I don't think the quality that you're seeing of pitching in AAA is great. And that matters because you get guys coming up facing stuff they've never really faced before, and they got to adjust. The league adjusts to them. It's a constant battle, and like there's countless examples of guys who've struggled at the outset of their careers. Like Alex Bregman's the example I always kind of go back to. He was like 1 for 40 or something like that to start his career. Obviously, he was fine. So just always be a little bit like wary of overreacting to early small sample size stuff, especially with a guy like Cam Smith. I was pretty aggressive pushing him in the preseason update to these rankings, and I feel like it's kind of been justified in terms of like what we were seeing from like a scouting standpoint has showed up on the field the last couple of weeks. So yeah, I think the other, you mentioned Yordan Alvarez. He's another one where it's just really tough because I always try to think of other examples of these types of situations. That's what I've been doing throughout the show today. But like Kyle Tucker missed a ton of time last year with a weird like knee bruise that was revealed was a hairline fracture. Once again, it's the Astros. So is that an Astros thing? Maybe. But I just think they're at the point, like, they're not going to push him. They're not going to risk any sort of setbacks. Like, they can't do that with a guy who's basically one of their franchise cornerstones. So we looked at Kyle Tucker's example. Like, he came back and was fine the following season. So I don't want to overreact with a guy with that kind of established elite track record. Now, he's maybe a more challenging example because of just the profile, like a bigger guy, where maybe this is a hand issue. Does that impact the swing, the power? Maybe. But I also don't want to push him into the back half of the top 50 and then he goes out and hits 40 home runs next year because I overreacted to a hairline fracture. So those are the types of things that I think are challenging to weigh when you do these rankings. And you might be wrong, but I always want to kind of give a little bit of deference to guys with a track record with the rankings.
Yeah, I agree. Yordan Alvarez is difficult to rank because I was looking at yours. I was like, wow, 20 seems high. Where do I have him? And I have him at 24. So I'm pretty high too. But then I was like, where do I want to move him down? But like, where do I move him down? I have Mookie Betts too high. I'm going to have to drop him down because it's – Well, I'll throw it back to you. What are your thoughts on Mookie Betts? You have him at 36. But is this year the beginning of the end?
I wouldn't say the end. I think it's maybe the end of like the elite stolen base production. Mm-hmm. Like – That's what I kind of look at as on the decline. He's going to miss time on Friday, I think, with a personal issue. So maybe there's stuff going on off the field that's been impacting him. They've kind of tried to move him around in the lineup. They've been batting him leadoff the last couple of games until they get Max Muncy back, and then we'll see how things shake out there. So, yeah, I just think...
And he had that really weird start to the season where he lost a ton of weight, and people were really concerned about what he was going to look like to start the season.
Yeah, so... Again, this goes back to like the Kyle Tucker, like weird outlier. Like Ronald Acuna missed seasons with injuries. Like when you have a guy who's that talented, I never want to just dismiss the possibility that they can take some time off and come back and get things right and be back in order. Like Corey Seager is a good example. Like he misses time all the time with injuries, and then he comes back and he looks like the best hitter on the planet sometimes. So yeah, just guys with that type of extended track record, I'm very hesitant to bump them lower. But when you start to creep into the mid 30s, it can start to look like a roller coaster where the decline is pretty precipitous and it comes quick. So just be aware of that with any guy in their 30s.
Sorry, I'm over here distracted because Stephen Kwan has 2 home runs today, and I'm like, maybe we should have let the trade go through.
He's right all.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, George. Were there any names that really surprised you when putting this together? Like you kind of got to the end and you go, "This is the right place. I'm not going to move him, but I can't believe I have this guy as low as I do, or this guy as high as I do."
So Michael Harris to me stands out as the name I can't figure out what the heck to do with, because from like a scouting standpoint, if I told you there was a guy who was only 24 and he had the type of production that he had earlier in his career at the big league level, you'd say this guy's like a top 20 player in the league. Like he'd had basically 3 straight seasons of close to 20 homers and 20 steals with borderline elite batting averages most of that time. You'd say that guy's like a first round pick, and he's just not this year. This year's kind of been a weird disaster kind of outlier. And that's one where I'll circle and I'll go to try and find an explanation, because there's something will come out in reporting. Was it mechanical? Was it mental? Was it physical? We don't know. So we'll see. He's the one who stands out for me on the hitter side. And from a pitching standpoint, I think Andrew Painter is exceptionally tough to rank because he had all the time off due to injury. He's come back. The stuff hasn't totally been top of the rotation at the AAA level. The production certainly hasn't been. But do you really ever want to write off a guy who the entire industry said was basically like a generational type of pitching prospect who could have been in the majors as like a 19, 20-year-old? No. So he, to me, is really tough to forecast because I don't want to drop him too far, and then he goes out and pitches well in the majors, and I have to reconfigure everything. So he's one who stands out to me from that standpoint, from a prospect side. And then like Spencer Jones is the obvious name. Like if you believe the approach can work, like if he can be like better Joey Gallo with the strikeouts, sure. But there's just not a lot of evidence, historically speaking, to show a guy coming up and striking out like over 30% of the time and being a really productive power hitter in the majors. So proceed with caution. I know he's got a 3-homer game today as we record this, so he's been on an absolute heater. But
yeah,
the plate skills, again, once he gets to the big leagues and he's facing better competition, like I don't know that the profile is going to work. He's just not going to make enough contact.
I want to ask you kind of one last question on the Dynasty stuff as we transition into the last segment of the show, which is this kind of the second half strategy guide. Do you find yourself using the Dynasty update and rankings in redraft decisions? Like if you're moving a guy up in Dynasty, are you more likely to say, I think we're going to see some real value added between now and the end of the year, so this is a guy I want to trade for that playoff stretch run in my fantasy league for this season? Do you use the Dynasty rankings in that way?
Yeah, I always kind of look for those guys where I was maybe higher on them than the rest of the crowd, and then maybe now they're producing in the majors, and maybe there's a little bit of a disconnect between what the public perception of their value is and what I feel it is. And I think that's a good process, kind of a theme that fantasy managers should be using. Like when I look at excuse me. When I go through sort of my rankings, I use my colleague Matthew Pooley. I use a lot of his top 300. He does a top 300. He pretty much updates it every week. So I try to go through there and see like where am I missing on guys in their present value, as opposed to like the future, long term. Because I try to use like a 3-year window when putting these rankings together. So the production right now matters a lot more than what you're going to get in 3 years from a guy. So I think that's a big part of my process is incorporating a guy's present value and what he means right at the moment. Like Cal Raleigh is a good example of that, where it's like, okay, yeah, probably need to push him a lot higher because of the impact he's making right now, where he's basically the number one player in fantasy. So you try to weigh that, not overreact too much with it, but it's definitely part of the process, I think, for me.
I actually want to really quickly ask you one more thing on the dynasty side, because you mentioned the 3-year window. How do you incorporate the guys who were just drafted into this, who we haven't seen play professionally yet? And you can keep this quick because obviously these are guys that are a couple years away. But like, what is your process for including them in these rankings?
So situation, age, proximity, those are the three biggest things I look at. And obviously, like, Ethan Holiday is a good sort of jumping off point for that, because he maybe isn't going to be the first one to reach the majors. It's probably going to be at least a couple years. But the context of a hitter with his type of power profile in Colorado, that matters. That's why he's the number one guy in my rankings. Like, I try to view things from a historical perspective and looking at recent draft classes. Having done this a couple years, it's like, okay, who does this situation and talent remind me of? Like Connor Griffin, a year ago, really highly thought of prospect, and then he didn't play after he got drafted, so we didn't basically see him on a field till spring training, and now I think he's pretty much universally regarded as one of the top 3 prospects in baseball from a dynasty standpoint. So that matters. Like, I'm just not writing a guy off completely because he's 18 and a shortstop. Like, I try to look at the situation and the talent, and I've also tried to be a little more aggressive with the college pitchers. Like a Jamie Arnold's a good example of this, from the current draft class, where, I want to push him a little bit higher, some of the other pitchers as well, because they're probably going to reach the majors within a year or two. Cade Anderson, I think, for the Mariners, probably going to be in the majors at some point in 2026. So those are the things I'm trying to balance a little bit more, is just like being aware that some of these guys might get to the big leagues a lot faster than we thought.
All right, let's get into kind of your back half, end of the year strategy guide. And I promise I'll let Maher talk again at some point. But I want to kind of, I want this to be very flexible, right? Like, I think this can go in a number of different directions, and I want to know what is important to you. And I will give Maher credit. Actually, this was kind of his idea for a part of this discussion. But I want to know, like, when you sit down and say, okay, we're at the end of July, I'm trying to, make the playoffs in head-to-head league. I'm trying to make that final push in a roto league, whatever it is. What do you care about? What are you paying attention to? Is it specific players? Is it overall league trends? Is it anything else? Is it a certain stat that you try to keep an eye on? What is it that you, George, sit down and go, this is, and it's a time of year where we know a lot of people are splitting their focus between baseball and football. It's a time of year where the grind of the season can wear on you. They call them the dog days of August for a reason. So if you could kind of own in on a couple of key pieces to pay attention to, what is that for you?
So part of my responsibilities with RotoWorld is doing player news 5 days a week. So I am constantly looking at lineups, injuries. I've kind of referred to this as like vibes is basically how I kind of view it. Like, who's producing and why? Like, is it the competition they're facing? I've used a good example a bunch of times. The Red Sox, they go on that big 10-game winning streak. Was that the Red Sox or was that the competition? It was impressive what they did against the Rays to close out the first half. But, they beat up on the Nationals, the Rockies, and then you look at strength of schedule in the second half. So I try to look at each situation like individually, and I try to look at the schedule, the lineup. Like, is there a reason this guy's been moved up in the lineup? Is there a reason he's producing at this type of level? So especially with younger players, because that's where I think you can see the biggest jumps in value is all of a sudden they're in a prominent lineup spot. Like if a Jack Caglianone got hot, like, and started going on a power surge, that matters. So you want to be quick to adjusting to that. Is there going to be a change in a closing situation? Who's struggling right now? Who's hurt? So just staying up to date on information, I think you can kind of get a sense of which players' values are changing the most. Like Mookie Betts is a good example, like Mike brought up. If you're not plugged in, you're probably not going to notice that he's been batting like 180 for a month. And you might trade for him thinking he's going to come back and be really productive. But there's not a lot of evidence or signs that, like, mentally he's at the point that's going to happen for him right now. So those are things to watch for. I think it's very specific. I try to go like each individual player and just kind of figure out what the vibes are, and then try to figure out what the future outlook is for them. Because if you start looking at leaderboards and all these different factors, you're going to end up like Zach Galifianakis with the numbers going around your head.
Yeah.
Like, you're just going to drown in information because you're just going to be able to find something to back up whatever your premise is. So just kind of hone in on the player and try to figure it out on your own would be the best advice I can give you, because at the end of the day, it's your roster, your decisions. So I want to be comfortable with my assessment and trust my own judgment on those calls.
Maher, Maher, I want to ask you actually about the news side of this too, and you can jump in a second also, but because you oversee our news desk here, so you are also kind of drowning in a lot of information. How do you sort through the noise?
I don't. I just eat all the noise, and I hate my life. No, I think you just have to, like you said, your attention's starting to get split. Like, you're going to be abandoning the show pretty soon to go focus on football and leave me to do it by myself. But
as is required of me by the management here, not something I'm pounding the table to do.
It's fantasy law. When training camp opens, you're gone, right? That's
yeah, pretty much.
This is why people think we don't like each other.
Think?
Which is another thing that comes up in the comments pretty frequently. They think that Worm and I actively dislike each other.
Again, you keep using this word "think." I don't know. More like they notice.
It doesn't help because Worm makes that joke every week. What was the question? I stopped listening.
About the news and just kind of how there is so much news out there, right? Like that it is easy to drown in it, and kind of how you sort through it.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, I think the one thing George mentioned is big is paying attention to lineups and more importantly why players are moving up in the lineup. Like he mentioned, Mookie Betts moving into the leadoff spot. I didn't know that. I just know that it's been a down year for all of the teams where I roster Mookie Betts. But yeah, I think it's knowing like which information to pay attention to. There's a lot of just like one-off lineup trends, but if a guy is just like kind of like batting 6th or 7th, and now he's like every few days he's batting 1st or 2nd, and then you realize, oh, whenever they face a lefty, he moves up in the order. That could be really valuable information when like setting your lineups, whether it's setting your lineup for the week, or like they got 4 lefties this week, and this fringe roster player for me is going to be batting 2nd most of the week. So it's kind of like filtering through what's the important news, which is the easy answer. I cheated.
It's basically figuring out what's actionable and what's not. Like, is this
that's a better way to say it.
Is this pitcher, have they made an adjustment and now they're in a point where they're going to have sustained success? Or like you said, why they've moved up in a lineup? Is this prospect, playing themselves into a more prominent role? And once like if Kobe Mayo goes on a hot streak and then all of a sudden Ryan O'Hearn gets traded at the deadline, all of a sudden he's playing every day, whereas he had started 4 games in the last month. So those are the types of things you want to know about, and stay ahead of, because then you're going to be first to react when the moment comes to make a move.
What stats, George, at this point in the year do you care about? If you're specifically in the context of identifying a guy you want to pick up off waivers, or even a guy that is rostered everywhere but that you want to trade for, is it something as simple as like, oh, I just want to look at who's got the big differences between their ERA and their expected, underlying information? Is it I want to look for guys who like their actual like pitch usage has made significant changes this year, and we're deep, way more than deep enough into the season to care about that. On the hitter side, is it like I want to look at StatCast and see who has the highest average exit velocity? Like if there's 1 or 2 metrics that, again, at this point in the year, when you're looking for good kind of buy low targets or even a buy high target, what are you looking at to say like this is legitimate, or this is something that I think is going to change for the better moving forward?
So that's a really great question, because a lot of these metrics, they're more useful from like a full season context as opposed to isolating them into really small samples. So like the difference between ERA and FIP, like that might show up over the course of 6 months, but it's not really actionable in a smaller sample. And there's a lot of like with the newer StatCast metrics, like I'm not smart enough to tell you what I'm looking at sometimes. Not that I don't understand what the stat means, but I don't know how to make it actionable. Like when we first started getting batted ball metrics, we had to figure out like how many batted ball events before this becomes like a reliable indicator. And then it was, okay, we've run the data. It's like 40 batted ball events. Now we can draw a conclusion. It's like one guy. So that's the type of stuff I want to look at. over a period of time, like, is a guy making harder contact? I think swing speed is proven to be one of these metrics that we can look at and say, okay, maybe there's a physical issue with a guy because all of a sudden he's not swinging as hard. Like that, is he dealing with something that's limiting his ability to swing hard? So that's something that can show up. Strikeout minus walk rate for me is kind of the one I go to for pitchers because I think it's pretty right there. Your strikeout rate and your walk rate kind of don't really change a lot. It kind of is what it is. Like, it's hard to fake that over an extended period of time. If you have bad control, you're going to walk a lot of guys. It's pretty straightforward. It's been proven out over time. So those, to me, I think are the most like straightforward ones I can look at and say, okay, that if I'm going to pick up a pitcher, it's for that reason. So yeah, those are the big ones that for me I look at. And then obviously upcoming schedule matters too. Like the matchups matter a lot at this point of the year.
Yeah, the fewer games you have left, the more who you play is going to matter.
Just to piggyback on that, because I thought George made some good points there. The swing speed one or the bat speed one is a really interesting one because a lot of these stats, they kind of, like you said, they come out. We're not really sure what to do with them. But then also as we get like more and more data and we can then start like comparing like year over year, you start to see like what do these trends mean. And I was actually watching a Red Sox game the other day and they were talking about Jarren Duran and how a lot of his contact numbers are way down this year, but his bat speed is actually way up. And it's actually, they think he's swinging harder and making less contact. So it's kind of interesting. Like you think like, bat speed is up, like that's all good, but he's having a down year offensively despite a big uptick in bat speed. So it's interesting the more we learn about this stuff and what it can mean.
And it kind of all ties into the point, like how to figure out what matters. Like he's not playing as much against lefties either. So he's seeing fewer pitches and he's not being as confident, maybe getting more aggressive in those swings against lefties too. That's leading to some more struggles there. So all of this is like big context stuff that you have to go to an individual player and try to figure it all out with them. It's not just looking at one single thing. It all kind of matters in context.
Maher, we got to get out of here. Any final questions for George before we wrap up?
No.
This has been great, George. Thanks for hopping on. And like I said, we always say we want to have more guests, and then it's always a great time when we do. And I don't know why we don't do it more. So appreciate you talking about all your dynasty rankings and the second half strategy guide. Any parting thoughts before we get out of here?
Not really. I will say that everyone should check out my dynasty rankings over at RotoWorld. I definitely would want to come back on with you guys in the offseason, kind of reset things, because the prospect landscape is going to change a lot in the next couple of weeks. Like, there's a bunch of names I'm kind of watching in the second half. Like, where is like Edward Florentino going to finish? Esteban Mejia for the Orioles throws like 103, and he's got pretty polished stuff. Like, that's the guy where I was like, okay, how high can I push him in my rankings and still not look crazy? So those are
on that note. I do have one actual final question. I mean, we can get out of here. We don't spend a lot of time on this, but you did remind me of. Did you think when looking at like dynasty rankings and looking at this like this recent draft class, did you think of it as kind of like a down year for prospects, or was 2024 really just like that good of a draft class?
Well, like 2024 had a bunch of like really polished college hitters. Like Nick Kurtz came out and was like immediately the best college hitter we'd seen in like forever. Just the ability to hit for power, control the strike zone. I could go on and on. Like, I'm a big fan, but yeah, I think this was a weird year because you had a lot of really good prep shortstops, and maybe the best pitcher in the class is like Seth Hernandez, who's a prep arm righty. So maybe one of the best prep righties we've had in a long time. So it was a weird kind of year is the way I look at it. And I think next year's class is really interesting. So it's just
even the top of the draft this year, like no one really knew who was going to go first overall, and then the first overall pick turned into a surprise, and everyone was like, "This is not what we projected to happen."
Yeah, so there's an interesting draft. There's a bunch of reasons like Eli Willits went first, but you look at the economics of the decision, and then also he was like 17. So if you're forecasting a guy at that age with his present skills and what he could grow into, like nobody's sitting here saying he's Ken Griffey Jr., like he's going to become like a Hall of Fame caliber player, but we have seen a lot of high school, prep shortstops make that leap and become really impactful, potentially franchise cornerstones. So yeah, it's just, this is the fun part of the year when you're just watching like how good is like Joshua Baez going to be, like Justinson Garcia, like just what's going to happen. These are the fun 2 months of the year for prospects to watch.
George, this has been great. We'll get out of here on the high note of you bringing up Esteban Mejia because I'm an Orioles fan and I'm just very excited for him. So that is a great note to wrap things up on. We will definitely have you back on. I would love to get you on in the offseason and kind of really dive into some of the more dynasty stuff. And Maher and I can take advantage and hopefully do better in our dynasty league that we're both in with the knowledge. So thank you so much, everybody. Definitely, please do go to RotoWorld, check it out. All of George's stuff, really, the updates and everything. But yeah, the top 500 dynasty rankings update was a beast. I was messaging with him a little on the day that he was putting that together, and you could tell it's something that you put a lot of work into and effort, and it shows. So it's great. So. Thank you again for coming on for Maher and for George. Everybody go check out his stuff at George Bissell on Twitter. I'm Ryan Wormeli. We'll see you next time.